So if you read the definition of the word attribution, you will see the word cause in there. So if we were to really think about the word attribution, I think it's a really amazing word, right? And it's about cause and effect. The reality is that the entire, the last 2 decades of sort of the marketing technology industry and analytics tools and attribution tools have frankly sort of bastardized that term to mean something that it doesn't.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Pranav Piyush, co-founder and CEO at Paramark. Pranav started his career at a well-known brand like PayPal and Dropbox, and he co-founded Padlet after that, the popular collaboration app to make school less boring. He's the former head of growth at Magento as well as Pilot.com before becoming VP of marketing at Bill. He's also a Reforge instructor for a new marketing measurement course. And in March of last year, Pranav co-founded Paramark to help marketers measure and forecast the impact of their investments. Pranav, really excited to chat today. Thanks for your time.
Big time long time listener, first time caller. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Phil.
Yeah, appreciate that, Pranav. We got a chance to meet ahead of this, and I've had the chance to dive in and read a lot of your content. I want us to start off with an interesting question around this idea of, are analytical skills for marketers become overrated? So back in the day, marketing was thought of as like the arts and crafts department, right? It was a lot more art than science. But then there was this like gold rush of data and like data-driven insights was kind of hot shit. And everyone has that on their LinkedIn. And I've seen this like shifting tide recently, though, or like a counter culture, where there was a recent tweet by Brian Halligan, HubSpot's co-founder, went viral on Twitter. He basically said marketers with analytical skills are overrated, but marketers with good tastes are underrated. Do you agree? What's your take there?
It's definitely a hot take. Short answer, I kind of agree with Brian. And I would totally sit in that camp that I think having good taste is probably the biggest needle mover for a marketer. Now, right? So like put it in a context, right? It's not a 0-1. It's a spectrum of skills, the spectrum of knowledge. And I would say that marketing is a creative function. You have to figure out how you're going to establish your presence in some human's mind that you have never actually met in the real world.
Yeah.
That takes creativity, my friend. So Brian is 100% right about that. I will, however, say that the counterpoint to this is what people call data-driven, what people call analytical skill set is absolute garbage. True understanding of the numbers and analytical skill set is very different from just being able to read a spreadsheet and create formulas.
Yeah.
So Brian gets that because guess what? He went to MIT and he's an engineer. Maybe, I don't actually know. Maybe he's a salesperson. But he's good with numbers. And so he thinks that everybody is. The reality is that 99% of marketers have no clue what terms like correlation mean, what terms like causation mean, what statistics means, what R-square means, right? They haven't heard of this because, frankly, our education system has failed us to bring those basic concepts to life. So there's truth to the counterpoint to Brian as well. But I agree with him that if you have great taste, and if you build great stuff, you are going to have a leg up over everybody else.
Yeah, interesting take. My perspective is that it's easy to say you're data-driven, and we chatted with the head of growth at Wistia, and he actually shat all over this idea of like data-driven, and like it's just this buzzword that people made up, and like data shouldn't drive everything that you do. And so it's kind of the spin on data-driven and being more data-informed, but actually being creatively driven. Like you need to be different and you need to have something unique to say to like carve out some type of excitement in the space. So I think that resonates.
One thing I'll add on that notion, I actually also think that that's a little bit of BS, right? Like data informed. So here's the thing. Okay, you have a genius idea, right? It's amazingly creative. you launch it. It either works or it doesn't work. And if you can't figure out the difference between the two, then your creativity doesn't matter as much. So this whole, like, we like to put things into clean boxes, right? Like, are you creative? Are you analytical? You gotta be both, my friend. And that is the hardest part about what you're doing with marketing or any other business function.
Mm-hmm.
Same exact thing goes to product development. You build a feature and you launch it, and 10% of people of your customer base uses it. Is it a win? Is it not a win? Well, 10%, that's a great number. But like, what does that mean in the broader context? Does it improve adoption? Did it improve revenue? Did it improve retention? Did you measure it through an A/B test? Like, if you didn't do all of those things, then just saying that, hey, it's a great feature and look, all this amazing feedback, well, if it didn't make you money or if it didn't save you money, what did it do?
Yeah, let's talk about the measuring aspect there, because I think that gets lost in the noise, and a lot of folks think they have a good handle on ROI and reporting on stuff. But I know you're really big on this idea of incrementality, and I think it's poorly defined by a lot of different people, and it doesn't have really good mind share with marketers. Like you mentioned, how our education system has kind of failed us a lot with folks. So I'll give you my definition, and I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
if you can kind of give me yours and what your take here is. But my favorite way of defining incrementality is business results for marketing campaigns or channels that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it's kind of a flip on how most people think of reporting and marketing results. Typically, a lot of folks, especially in my experience, is attribution. And that's typically influenced revenue or influenced pipeline that is attributed to marketing campaigns or channels. What's the difference between the two for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very semantic question,
Yeah.
right? So if you read the definition of the word attribution, you will see the word cause in there. So if we were to really think about the word attribution, I think it's a really amazing word, right? And it's about cause and effect. The reality is that the entire, the last 2 decades of sort of the marketing technology industry and analytics tools and attribution tools have frankly sort of bastardized that term to mean something that it doesn't. So cause and effect is at the heart of the word attribution. That may not be how the world is using that word today. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, incrementality. I liked your definition. It's sales that would not have happened until and unless that marketing campaign or channel or strategy was put out in the world.
Right.
That is incrementality. One way that I talk to people is that if a prospect would have bought your product or service, regardless of the marketing that they see, then that marketing isn't incremental.
Mm-hmm.
Flip that, right? Vice versa. If a prospect would have never bought a product or service until and unless they saw a piece of marketing, then that marketing is very incremental. You can change that to sales. You can change that to partner. And that's the other interesting thing for B2B. You have to look at it beyond just your marketing channels. You have to look at your scaled sales channels. You have to look at your partner channels, your affiliate channels, and so on and so forth. But I like your definition. It was simple and clean and clear.
Cool. So let's touch on the MTA piece there, the multi-touch
Yeah.
attribution. I know you have a bit of a bone to pick with that. Followed you on LinkedIn for a bit now, and see you call out a lot of the, like you said, garbage around kind of the definitions. And I don't know, like I talk to a lot of folks, and it's like the holy grail. Like, attribution needs to be solved. We need to have multi-touch attributions. We need to like get all the touch points in one place. And I think that, like, still though, a lot of folks do understand that it isn't a perfect science. Some of the issues with MTA that are well documented, and you've kind of mentioned in a lot of posts, are channel biases, missing offline touches, the privacy impacts on like cookies and click IDs. But like you said, the real bone to pick with MTA is around this idea of causality, right?
Yep. That's 100% right. And it all, so when we were talking about the word attribution itself and the meaning of that word being cause and effect, and I do this in a very simple way. I ask people, somebody clicked on a link on Google. Did that click cause the downstream conversion? And in some cases, maybe. In some cases, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So let's walk through an example. If I search for humans of Martech on Google, And the first link that shows up is your organic SEO link. And I click through and then I subscribe to your podcast. Well, guess what? Your analytics tool, your MTA tool, will tell you your organic SEO efforts are great. What I will tell you as an outsider is, what got me to put Humans of Martech in the search box? And unless and until you recognize and acknowledge the fact that you don't know what got me to put that term in the search box, then we're not really talking about cause and effect. We're just talking about what I call behavioral analytics, which is not that different from your website analytics, your product analytics, right? Thing A happened, thing B happened, thing C happened, and then thing D happened. But you can't just by looking at that say that thing A caused thing B, and thing B caused thing C, and thing C caused thing D. Now, that takes some clarity of thought. And, unfortunately, because of all the pressures that marketing ops and analytics teams feel, they don't even get the room to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, well, we just need MTA. Like, we need to show results next week. And you just go to the easy thing. And one of the things I will say is like the Martech industry has made a lot of dollars by building the easy thing rather than by building the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to change, and it will change in the next 5 years.
Yeah. I like your perspective on like when you're doing ROI reporting, it's not for a marketer to show to the CMO or their boss, like, what is the value of the campaigns that they did? Like, we should take a step back and think about it as when we're reporting to the board. And I think that like I haven't seen like I've had the pleasure of like being part of some of those discussions and QBR presentations, and folks just gravitate to this idea like, oh yeah, attribution, like whatever the team is telling me, like it must be true. Like they're using a tool to do MTA. If they're saying this campaign led to this many dollars, like it has to be true. Like the tooling has to be like accurate there. But there is no deciphering of causality, especially in startups. And we're going back to like incrementality here, but like the causality element there is wouldn't have happened otherwise. And sometimes like marketing campaigns might correlate with a spike in signups, but it doesn't always mean, like you said, that the campaign caused those signups. Might have been something, other factors that were at play, that campaign, multiple campaigns going on at the same time. Obviously, like the right answer to this, like you kind of teased out, is a well thought out A/B test, statistically significant experimentation design, right? But the reality, especially in startups, is like not everyone has the volume of traffic or the time to wait for that volume to have detectable effect. How do startups tackle this when like they're really early and like yourself right now, like probably not a ton of traffic compared to like what you're going to get next year? How do you tackle this?
It's a good question. So for an early stage business, right? If you're, I would say, like us, 4 people, and by the time this launches, maybe a little bit more. And, we're not even doing any paid media right now. Our channels are warm outbound, events, and a whole bunch of content and social. And when I think about, I don't care about attribution. Now, I have a unique perspective because I understand marketing. And if you understand marketing as a founder, I think you'll be in the same boat. Attribution is not the question that you ought to be solving for right now. The real question is, how do you go from 100K in revenue to $1 million in revenue to $2 million in revenue? Right. And you do whatever it takes, and you're doing all the marketing and sales yourself as a founder. So if you don't know that firsthand, no software is going to tell you. I'm sorry to disappoint people, right? So I would say until you get to like 2, 3, 4, 5 million in revenue, your intuition, your head of sales' intuition, your head of marketing's intuition about what's working, what's not working is probably better than trying to use and get to precise answers with software. It's a waste of time and effort. I should be able to count on my fingertips the channels. I should not have more than 3 channels, I would argue. Really crack those 3 channels. And if you have fewer channels, your need for attribution and ROI is like non-existent. Okay, so that's one. Now, let's say I raise $5 million tomorrow and I want to spend $500,000 of that on marketing over the next 6 months. What do I do? Now I have real money. And I'm like, I'm not going to, double my outbound efforts through that. Probably want to do some scaled marketing, right? That's why marketing exists. Here's the simplest answer. Instead of running broad campaigns, you run a geo-based test. And that's a very, very simple thing. You don't need Paramark for this. You don't need any software for this. You go into, if you're doing non-brand Google, you're doing LinkedIn, you're doing Meta, whatever you're doing, you have options of targeting your spend by geography. Mm-hmm. You take your target account list. If I want to target 1,000 accounts, and I look at where are their CMOs and their CFOs and their CROs located. Create that list. It's very easy to do. Plug in Clay here, Apollo here, a bunch of other online tools that help you do that. And this is a B2B example. And I find the geographical footprint, right? Now I can see, okay, a bunch of my population is in SF and New York and whatever. And then I say, okay, I'm going to run a test where I'm going to do all of my ads in Austin for a period of 2 months because I see that 30% of my target list is in Austin or in Texas. And I'm not going to run the advertising in New York.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm going to see what is my organic visits from New York and what are my organic visits from Texas. I'm going to see what my lead volume is from New York and what is my lead volume from Texas. It's a very simple test. You don't need formal statistical training here. And even with a low volume, if you are investing the right way, if your message is resonating, if you're reaching the right people, you'll see a bump. If you don't see a bump, please stop spending that money. So it's not that complicated, and I would lean towards experimentation in the early days because you don't have a whole bunch of historical data. Mm-hmm. Running these geo tests is so easy. So every marketer out there, please get into experimentation early. Yeah, that's what I would do.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the simplicity of geo tests, and I know you also mentioned in a couple other podcasts time-based tests, which is even easier than the geo tests, right? I'm curious if you have like other simple versions to throw in this bucket, and what your definition of the time-based test versus the geo test is, but also like really curious to ask you, when is it okay to accept the potential limitations of these tests? For me, like the limitations of time-based tests, like you said, you're running this campaign for a month and then you turn it off for a month. This one doesn't work as well for email and some of the other channels, and it assumes that everything else is the same during those 2 months, except for that one campaign that you're turning off. But reality is often there's a bunch of shit that will be different from month to month, especially in startups, right? Like seasonality, external factors, a bunch of other campaigns, web changes going on. And it's a bit better in geo tests. Like instead of running your ad campaign to all states or your email campaign to all geos, you pick one segment and you do it in that one segment and not another one. You compare the conversion rate there. While that is better than the time-based tests, like you still run into some potential geographic variability, like demographic differences. When is it okay to accept the potential limitations of these tests versus like a more robust A/B experimentation model?
Yeah, totally. So a couple of things to unpack here, right? One is if you are doing experimentation on emails or in product or where you have a lot more control about how you're going to split the audience into control and test buckets, right? These are user-based tests. You're saying, I'm going to take 50% of the users and split them into control and test. That actually gives you a lot of control. And the ambiguity and the limitations are probably kind of disappear, except that do you have enough volume, right? If you're only talking about 10 users, what are you doing? Like, you're not at the stage for doing testing, yeah. Right? Like, just stop. Figure out how to go from 10 to 100 in different ways.
Right.
When you do experimentation on a surface that you don't control, and that is most of your marketing, media sort of channels, Meta, Google, LinkedIn, out of home, direct mail, podcasts, out of home, our sort of strong recommendation is geo-testing. And yes, there are going to be differences between geographies, but you can actually pretty easily look at your traffic by state over the last 6 months and see the trend lines. And what you're going to notice is that you have a few geographies that follow the same exact trend line. And we think that there's a lot of variation in the real world, but look at the data. And if you look at the data, you'll be able to tell whether there is actually a lot of variation or not. Like, somebody might hypothesize that, oh yeah, like there's a lot of seasonality in New York, but that seasonality doesn't happen in Texas.
Mhm.
Well, how do you know that? Like,
Yeah.
let's go look at the data. And I recommend this to you. Like, go to Humans of Martech and look at the last 12 months of traffic on your website. I'm pretty sure the seasonality trends are not there in the sense of like they're consistent across every geography,
Mhm.
unless you have huge multi-geo type of businesses, right? Where you got Europe and APAC and Africa and North America, then obviously you're not a small startup, like you're probably much bigger and there's a different answer. So that's the second point. The third point about time-based testing, the concept is essentially saying double down on something for a short period of time. So I'll give you an example. How would I do this on LinkedIn? Organic content, just my content, my feed. A great way of running this would be to say, hey, I usually do one post a day and I skip Saturdays. I'm going to increase my frequency. I'm going to go to 2 posts a day for a month and see if that has any impact on my overall impression volume. Okay, that's great. The next month, I'm going to say, I'm going to go all video with the 2 posts a day frequency. Okay, let's see if that has any impact on my impression volume. So you're more limited because you can only run one test at a time, right? Because it's time-based tests. You're comparing month 0 to month 1 to month 2, but it's still better than just saying, I'm just going to do stuff and hopefully it'll work. So you have to have a big enough change for a time-based test to work. If you're testing on the fringes, like I'm just going to change the tone of my voice a little bit here and there, I don't think you're going to be able to detect the difference that you're hoping to see.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. What are your thoughts on like this concept of, we kind of tease this out already a little bit. Like you said, you need a certain volume to care enough about even doing like some of these tests. But I asked this to a lot of recent guests, this idea of like, does everything even need to be a test? And when I was at WordPress.com, like we obsessed about everything that we could test. And if it wasn't like properly designed as an experiment, like could we really roll it out with any type of confidence that this did have positive impacts on some of our metrics? Let's say, for example, like when I was at WordPress, we really focused on email, and lifecycle was kind of like my focus area in the first couple months. Let's say I'm like leveling up our email onboarding sequence from a 4 email nurture that's like 3 years old to this like robust use case segmented version that has like a full workflow for it. It's based on actually listening to customers, getting feedback on stuff. We know the new one is better in theory. Do we really need to like roll this out as a test? Is that where like the time-based tests might come in? Like we look at the baseline from the last X months and what the next couple of months are going to be. Like, what are your thoughts there?
It's a good question. I think there's a few things to unpack there, right? One is there's a stat. This is actually from Booking.com and Amazon and Uber and Airbnb and all the meta-analysis of all of the experimentation work that they have put out there. And what they usually find is that 70 to 80% of tests are going to come out to be basically failures. So first point, if you're doing a whole bunch of testing, 7 to 8 out of 10 tests are not going to be incrementally contributing to your business. So are you okay with that? And if you are, then that's a cultural positive, because you should then you have freedom to do more testing, because you're not always getting asked for like, well, if it didn't work, let's just stop it and then do something else, right? Like that's not the idea. The idea is to constantly be learning. So generally, yes, when possible, do it as an experiment. But the counter to this is here. Is it worth experimenting? And I'll give you an example. Email is a good one. If I know for a fact that emails are incrementally driving 3% of trial conversion, I'm just taking a random example from a SaaS business, right? Start a trial, 30 days, trial conversion, you've got a nurture email, and that if you stop the nurture email, your trial conversion goes down by about 3%. Okay. We have established that fact. So that's the first test that I would run is, are those nurture emails even contributing anything? Then the question is, okay, what's the next goal? Are you trying to get that number to be even higher? Are you trying to increase trial conversion by X percentage? Is that the goal of whatever you're doing with nurture, or is it something else? Is it about making sure that there is high awareness of all the features on your paid product post-trial. So it all actually starts with the hypothesis. What are you trying to achieve? Do you have a good way of measuring it? And what are you going to do if you are successful with this test?
Right.
And that should dictate whether you run the test or not. And there's an opportunity cost because you can't have unlimited number of tests running at any given time on any given surface. So you also have to ask a question of, well, is this in the top 3? Is it in the top 10? And use that overall sort of culture and framework of experimentation to decide whether you should run a test or not. Very sort of tactical example. We relaunched our website 3 months ago or something. And we did not launch it as an A/B test. That makes no sense for our website. Now, having said that, I did a whole bunch of qualitative research.
Right.
We have great advisors. We have customers. I have a lot of marketing friends, and I spent time with them. I sent them Figma mocks and said, tear it apart. Tell me what's working, what's not working. And we did that over 3 months to collect the feedback and then put out something. Guess what? Got unprompted feedback from folks like Rand Fishkin, who just like happened to chance upon our website and is like, this is an amazing homepage. And I'm like, great, okay. That's I don't need to run it as a statistically significant A/B test. That's good enough because I do trust Rand's taste.
Yeah. Does it need to be a test? No, if Rand says it's good, like a stamp of approval.
Ship it. Yeah.
What do you think about, I don't know if this is like an overarching trend, and it's definitely not the majority of folks that I've had on the show, but there are these like exceptions of companies that actually like purposely don't invest in any type of ROI analyses or reporting. And they're like allergic to any discussions about attribution. So Wistia and Ahrefs are 2 examples of that. Chatted with 2 growth leaders at both of those companies. And Pranav, they don't even use Google Analytics. Like they do not track the impact of anything that they do other than revenue. Revenue is the only thing they look at. And they've both said like, hey, if I'm doing something and the next month revenue is going up in the right, like I'm doing something right. Like, why do I need to obsess about GA and doing multi-touch attribution to figure out like, was it this piece of content or that piece of content? So like, I don't know, there's almost like a counterculture of just like, why would I spend all this time like building out a data team and an analytics function to like make sure everything is like driving revenue when like we're doing really good right now. We're focusing on quality content based on intuition, based on our users' feedback. So like, why do we need to obsess about reporting? What are your thoughts there?
Great question. And there's a lot of PLG companies that fall in that same sort of bucket, right? So if you've got, and I spent time at Dropbox, like you could stop, like you could probably get rid of the entire marketing and sales team and it would still continue to make money for a long time, right? So that's the idea behind sort of what you're saying. So a couple of things. One is there's a certain scale at which that totally works when you have really strong product and really strong in-product marketing. And what I mean by that is, right, I'm a subscriber to Ahrefs. I get emails from them. I see their videos. I see their content. I see Tim everywhere on my feed. And yeah, they're putting out content that is resonating. And I would argue, and tell me if I'm wrong, he is probably looking at the total impressions and reach that he is getting from his content. And he may not admit it. He may not be tracking that through Google Analytics, but he has some way of knowing that, hey, it does look like my traffic on Ahrefs seems to be going up and to the right. And every time I post on LinkedIn, seems to get lots of engagement. Every time I put out a YouTube video, it gets tens of thousands of views. Guess what he's doing? He's doing what we're talking about through leading indicators and through, I would argue, sort of good intuition looking at those leading indicators. Now, Ahrefs is a $100 million business. Wistia is probably, $70-80 million business. I actually don't know the numbers, but I think that that's where they're going to be. And I think it can work when you have a really strong product and really strong founders who understand marketing. And I think Ahrefs and Wistia are both in that camp. To go from 100 million to $1 billion, things are going to change. to go from self-serve to also adding enterprise sales, things are going to change.
Right.
And the final part, which I think is the linchpin here, is the market and the competition. They are not immune to competition and the market. What does that mean? This is a famous example of Tesla never advertising, right? They did actually start advertising last year. Why did they start? Because the competition has changed. The biggest electronic vehicle manufacturer is now, I think, in China. And every major sort of, regular auto company is entering the EV market. And everyone's advertising their EVs. So you don't have a choice but to advertise. So I think Vistia Ahrefs are going to reach a similar point where they're going to have to put out more marketing dollars because nobody's sitting in isolation and going, oh yeah, let's just let Ahrefs take the whole market. Let's just let Vistia take the whole market. The market doesn't work like that, right? You're going to have competition. That's going to mean that both of those companies are going to have to invest more in marketing in a differentiated way. And when you have 15, 20 different channels show up suddenly, your intuition gets weaker. And Tim doesn't scale, right? You see what my point? Like when you have 100 marketers or 200 marketers in your organization, that doesn't scale. You can't do everything off of intuition. As much as I would like, but yeah, like good luck. Like look at Elon. I think they've even hired an agency as far as I can tell. So yeah.
Yeah, I saw a lot of backlash with the one ad they did for one of their car commercials. Like folks are just like, this looks like
And
every
then
single car commercial.
that's right. And then they fired their entire team, right? So
Yeah.
they started advertising, they launched a big campaign, they fired everybody on the team. And I think they're starting from scratch, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to have to figure out advertising if he wants to ward off the competition from the rest of the players. Like that's life.
Yeah, we could do a full episode on Elon's thoughts on advertising, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about holdout tests. So this is very near and dear to my heart right now. Like this isn't actually common terminology for a lot of marketers. Like I've chatted with some pretty seasoned marketers that are just like holdout tests. Like what does that mean? And I think it's a really good word. How do you kind of describe it? Like at Customer IO, sponsor of the show, and one of my favorite email tools, they have this baked into the product
That's
itself. Right. A lot of other tools, like they don't really talk about holdout tests, and it's not really part of the product. Like at WordPress.com, we had an internal ESP, and we had a crazy workaround for doing holdout tests, but really sophisticated data team, and holdout tests was like part of the like culture almost. Like if you're not doing a holdout tests when a new sign up comes in and they're like you're holding them out from getting a lot of your other stuff, what are you even doing? But essentially like this idea of removing 2 to 5%, whatever the percentage is, of your audience from ever receiving any of your campaigns, whether it's email or some of your other channels. What are your thoughts on holdout tests?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. A few different directions that we can go in. But first off, Customer IO, huge fan of what they're doing. So shout out to the team there, a bunch of friends on that team. And I agree, every marketing platform should have some sort of a holdout testing capability. So emails, relatively easier to do because you control the surface.
Right.
And that's absolutely gold standard. Everybody should be doing holdout testing when it comes to in-app or in-email or known sort of user type of flows. So it's a no-brainer to me. And Customer IO makes it super easy, so go buy Customer IO. When it comes to, so my thoughts are pretty simple. Yes, of course you should do it. The challenge that happens is sometimes the fear is, well, those 5% of people are not going to get on emails.
Yes.
Like there's this like opportunity cost. And so, yes, if you want to know the true impact of your emails, you have to be willing to live with that cost.
Yeah.
I will also argue you don't have to run that forever. You could run a holdout for 3 months or 6 months, 1 year, understand the incremental contribution, go back to 100%, and then do that again 2 years or 3 years from now. So there's a little bit of it's not, one size fit all sort of approach to Holdout. You have to think about what is the question that you're really trying to solve for. Again, right? Like, why are you doing it? And once you know the answer of, or once you've proven or disproven the hypothesis that you set out with the Holdout test, then you can end the test, move on to life as usual, and then set up a new Holdout test with a different hypothesis. Now, I also want to give flowers where they're due. Meta is the only ad platform that has a native holdout testing called Conversion Lift. And if you're advertising on Meta and you've not used Conversion Lift, like, what are you doing? Like, go do that. And then Google has something good for YouTube and for display as well. So those are the two big platforms that have invested in incrementality testing, holdout testing, whatever you want to call it. It's like true randomly controlled trial sort of type of experiences on those platforms. So one part of me wishes that in 5 or 10 years, every ad platform, every email platform, every Martech platform has holdout testing capabilities. That is how marketing should be run.
Very cool. That would be a fun future to live in for sure. Because they're, like you said, it's easier for email, but like if it's not baked into the product, there are still a ton of like
Yes.
manual workarounds to do it. Like new users come in every single day, randomly selecting 2% of those users, putting them in a manual list, and making them part of your like global opt-out group. So anything you're doing after that, they're not part of it. So there's a system for it in place, but it's like, why isn't it part of a lot more of these
Totally.
tools? I want to ask you
Totally.
about marketing mix modeling. We chatted MTA and incrementality, but we didn't touch on marketing mix modeling yet. Is it fair to say that like all three of these reporting mechanisms are useful, but they differ in their focus areas? Would you say that like incrementality centers on isolating the true impact of specific activities? MTA focuses on the contribution of individual touchpoints, and MMM looks at the broader impact of the entire marketing mix. Can you give us examples where like each method is best suited for?
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because just my strong opinions on MTA, but I will give it a shot. I
Maybe
will
we
give it
can
a
ignore
shot.
MTA, focus on MMM if
No,
you
no, no,
want.
no, no. I think if you take away the word attribution from
Yeah,
MTA, then I think about the underlying concept of behavioral analytics,
right.
right, as being incredibly important because you are optimizing the bottom of the funnel conversion journey, the things that are captured in a digital sort of frame. And so that's how I think about tracking touches and clicks. You're trying to optimize the bottom of the funnel conversion journey with multi-touch tracking. I don't call it attribution. MMMs and incrementality testing are essentially correlation and causation. That should be the mental model. MMMs give you a correlational analysis on your historical data set and tell you that, hey, this channel, this campaign, this strategy is most correlated with your business outcomes. And these particular channels are least correlated with your business outcomes. That's incredibly helpful to get you to a starting point, but it's not enough because correlation is not causation. So if you want to get to causality, then you have to run experiments, and incrementality testing is one way of doing experiments. Holdout testing is another way of doing experiments. A/B testing is another way of doing experiments. And experimentation becomes critical if you want to get to causality. Now, MMMs and incrementality are telling you two different things. One is looking at the past and trying to predict the future. One is telling you, hey, let's run a real world real world test and see what that does. And when you do them together, they're actually very symbiotic. You use MMM to inform the types of tests you want to run, and you use the results of testing to feed back into MMM as what are known as priors. So it's a fancy word of saying, what is my prior belief about a certain channel as a result of my incrementality test? So very symbiotic, and I would argue every sophisticated company should be investing in both. It's not a either or. It's really, you got to have both tools in your tool set.
Would you say that MMM is a bit better suited for later stage companies? Like, is incrementality something you should focus on in the first couple of like months or whatever after launch, and MMM comes later?
Yes, I think that's totally fair. If you're earlier stage, incrementality testing is a fantastic jumping off point
Yeah.
because you don't need a whole bunch of history. MMMs do require you to have a whole bunch of history. So if you don't have that history, there's
Right.
nothing for the model to correlate with. So yeah, incrementality testing first if you're earlier stage. If you're spending 20, 30 million, I would flip that and say do MMM first
Hmm.
because you probably have lots of data already.
Mhm.
So you don't want to wait for testing results to come in, right? You can see some insights right off the bat. Use that to inform your experimentation roadmap.
Yeah.
And so it's, yeah, not a cookie cutter answer, but yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Hopefully early companies aren't spending 20, 30 million on meta too
You
early.
never know. You never know.
I got two last questions for you, Pranav. This has been a super fun conversation. Like I said, email is kind of really close to my heart. So I've got a question about prioritizing experiments and why email is never at the top of that list. This idea of like how do you prioritize the tactics and the channels that you want to measure or experiment with is really interesting. We talked a lot about like the methods of doing that, but the whole topic of like how do you prioritize all of these ideas that you have, email is often way at the bottom of that list because it has this conception that email is free. Like, why should we need to test something because email is free? Email is not free. Many enterprise teams have a bunch of internal tooling and resources that are dedicated to email. Email development is expensive, email deliverability is time intensive. Those are expensive resources, and brands love designed emails, and it takes a ton of time to do those. Nowadays, companies are spending big bucks on Martech to kind of stay out of the spam folder also. So email isn't
Mhm.
free. Like how can email get a seat at the table and be higher up
Mm.
on those like prioritization for experiments?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and we often have this discussion in our team about this perceived lack of leverage on organic or earned or owned channel, right?
Hmm.
Everyone thinks about marketing as paid.
Yeah.
Like, let's go put more money in X and Y and Z. And I think there was a really fun one from the National Park Services a couple of days ago. I saw somebody posting about the amazing work that their social media team is doing. Just hilarious captions on social for the National Park Services, right? Like millions of views, hundreds and thousands of likes. It's like, if you figure out how to do email, organic social, earned in a way that gets you a unique advantage over anybody else fighting the paid battle, then you have a significant upside in the business. So one is like inculcating that culture that it is possible.
Mm.
And to show that possibility, you really have to look for role models and examples. Arby's is a great example. We were talking about this when Jon Stewart first resigned or left the Daily Show. Arby's tweeted at him and said, "Hey, we got a job for you," right? It was hilarious. And guess what? Jon Stewart took that and put it on the show.
Mm.
And that is your classic example of what is possible with earned and owned and social. And I think email falls in the exact same bucket.
Mm.
And this is where I go back to like full circle, right? Brian's quote from the beginning of this episode about taste and creative. Figure out the crazy shit,
Mm.
the stuff that nobody's going to let you take risks with, and pitch that. Because if you just stay in the lane, it's a square, here's our logo, here's my personalization, Dear Pranav, and here are the 3 bullets, and here's a video. I'm sorry to inform you, you're dying in the sea of sameness.
Especially in B2B. Everyone is doing that. Pranav, this has been super fun. I got one last question for you. You're a co-founder, CEO. You're also wearing the CS and the sales hat these days, early in your startup journey. You're also relearning a lot of the foundational elements of marketing, like building a website, doing copywriting. And recently, you've also dived into weightlifting, and you're a father of 2. clearly you've got a ton of shit going on right now. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find that balance between all the stuff you're working on while staying happy?
It's a good question. I think it's a lifelong pursuit. And, the things that I do, like specifically sort of, lifting weights, that was a conscious decision to kind of give my brain something else to think about for an hour and something really hard that I've never done in my life. Because if I can do that, then I can do everything else, right? So there's a little bit of that. I think a little bit of it is like just remembering that the pursuit of happiness is just a lifelong challenge. I'm very much into, you know, Buddhism and Stoicism and all of those concepts. And that's a constant struggle. You're always suffering. You're always finding happiness, and take joy in the little things. And not every day is going to go perfect. So, be compassionate to yourself. Recently started meditating again with the Waking Up app. So here's another plug for the Waking Up app. And I don't know. I think the last part is like really just staying connected with friends and family and being as sort of vulnerable as you can, because that is what makes, ultimately we're all gonna be in a 6 feet under the ground or whatever your ending rights are.
Yeah.
Like you're like there's nothing to really worry about in life, and just constant reminder that that's what it is. I'm sounding way too zen, but in reality, I probably am not as stable and calm every day of the week. So I want to end on that note. But it's trying to stay connected with myself, what's working, what's not working, journaling. That's something that I've been doing for a couple of years. It's been fantastic. So bunch of little life hacks. Yeah.
Awesome. What's your number one parenting hack? I've heard that, like one of the main obstacles to building your own thing and starting out your own company is like, I've got a little family. I've got little kids that I don't want to miss out on their life. Like, I don't want to work like 12, 14-hour days. Like, how do you think about that?
I don't know that I have a tip per se. I like teaching a lot. And so one of the things that keeps me grounded is teaching my girls math, teaching them
Nice.
science, teaching them. I heard my 7-year-old one day just like saying something like, I was talking about branding or marketing. And she's like, yeah, that's what you do, right? And I was like, proud father moment. Oh my God, like she knows what that means. And he's like, yeah, you go to work and you build a brand. And I'm like, this is amazing. So it's just like little things like that of just, you know, constantly be teaching and also be learning from them, right? What are
Mm.
they learning in school, and what are the conversations they're having with their friends? Them trying their jokes on me to see if, they can make Papa laugh. It's just being there, making sure we have enough time, because that's definitely been an issue where you have less time,
Right.
and you have to constantly kind of make sure you don't give up on that part of life.
Love it. Thanks for sharing, Pranav. Anything you want to plug for the audience before we go?
No, I love Humans of Martech, so I hope that you all continue to grow your followership and listenership. I get a lot of value, and I think I've learned a lot from the episodes and hearing all the amazing guests. So, yeah, nothing to plug. If people are interested, they know what to do.
Love it. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time, Pranav. It's been super fun.
Absolutely.